growth requires more than capital.
Why do we call it the cheat code? Nobody said growth had to be fair.
Revenue solves everything.
Welcome to the cheat code. What was our fastest path to revenue?
We tend to like to do things the hard way.
What's the cheat code? It's giving yourself an unfair advantage over the others.
What is it that really works, and how are we going to grow these organizations?
That's our cheat code.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Cheat Code Podcast. This is part two of our interlude into partnerships as a whole. I am joined here with Josh Wagner and Justin Gray. How's everyone doing?
Doing great, man.
Keeping it real, man.
Well, last time I thought we had really excellent discussion. Obviously, we're all very passionate about this topic.
If we do so ourselves.
And so I think for this week, we can jump into different partner types. I know there's a handful of different partner types out there, and then there's some sub-partner types in between there. But really, I think, what's most important when a founder or organization is thinking about partnerships is where do you start? What is the most, basic way to get into a partnership? What does that look like?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that we always run into, and you'll find this especially in early stage companies that are eager for traction, is they're going to set up some sort of referral partnership as kind of that first easy, low friction thing to do. They'll set up a rev share or a commission or something along the lines to get people excited. And
why does no one know what a rev share looks like under a referral partnership? Like, that's the first question that seems to always come back. Like, what, to me, it just seems like it's been around for so long, and so there are kind of those table stakes, or like bounds, right? But like it's just strange to me that like no one goes into a P&L planning or like a partner strategy planning exercise knowing what they can give based on a cost of sale target.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think it's almost one of those easy button things in their mind. Of you just go and you see spray and pray with that as much as you do with a traditional direct go to market, right? It's like, well, I'm going to talk to as many people as I can who might have some affiliation in my space and say, hey, you refer someone over, you get a 15% rev share, or 20%, or whatever it may be. And it's just kind of this non-intentional thing that people do and think that there's going to be some sort of outcome associated to it.
That also brings up like another topic that's always crazy to me, and Josh, I'm sure you will know particularly who I'm referring to with this, but like just in terms of cost of sale, like, and when something is, I feel like everyone designs sales comp programs, partner compensation programs with the intention of failure, because and then once those rates start getting paid, then it's like, oh, we got to lower these rates. So like, number one, that tells me there's not a lot of intentionality on the upfront in terms of like what that referral is actually worth. What does it take from a performance standpoint to warrant a referral, right? Because like Sean, you were talking earlier before the show about like affiliate links and things like that in terms of like this very small, oftentimes nominal, like, oh, you're on my website buying sneakers and I'm going to send you over to the, world's greatest shoelace manufacturer. And I'm going to give you, some 1% rev share in accordance to that. But then when things start getting paid out, like it's like, oh, how much are we paying for these things? I think that's probably less of the undercurrent for me always seems like it's like, well, I don't think it's that hard, or I don't think the referral quality is that great. Anytime that you're like scrutinizing what you're paying out in terms of a cost of sale or cost of referral, when it's being successful, because, obviously if it was massively successful and everyone was earning money, no one would be scrutinizing that. But I guess, the call to action here is like, you have to design these programs to succeed, and you have to define what that success looks like upfront, which again is a major, like, obvious statement and like a no shit type of moment, but like just it so often isn't done.
That's right. I was talking to an entrepreneur the other day and about this exact same topic, and he was asking me what advice I had for how to start a partner program in general. And so I said, the first thing you want to think about is outcomes, and you've got to decide what outcome you want with that program. And if it's top of the funnel, then you start looking at a thing like an affiliate partnership, which is links to other marketing, clients out there that can just bring some things in and some interest at the top of the funnel that you can qualify and put through. If you're looking for, direct close one deals, you can look at something like channel, but, from a referral perspective is the easiest barrier for entry. And so again, I think to your point, like oftentimes they're designed to say, hey, we don't want to overpay for these referrals, but the problem is you're not going to get any unless there's incentive enough to start that channel. And so, they might start at 10, 15, 20%, but in reality, that's not going to move the needle at all. And you're not going to be able to plug that into your overall pipeline strategy or revenue strategy. And so you just have all of these feelers out there. You have to go through things like legal, and you have to have these contracts made, and you have to do all of this effort in order to get the most minimal return on it. And so I think you have to think in outcomes, and you have to think about what happens when it works.
Yeah. And I'm not saying that the big guys always do partnerships, right? Or referral partnerships for that matter, but they do know what they're getting into, right? They're not a big guy for no reason at all. They are looking at purely as an acquisition play, and they don't care if their cost of acquisition eats up their entire margin year one, if they're a true SaaS business with a decent retention rate, because years 2, 3, 4, and 5 are what really matters. So at least they're thinking about that. They don't think through maybe a lot of the other things that are going to make that sing, but to the point of outcomes, we acquire customers. We don't care how much it costs us because we're going to make that money back on the back end.
That's right. And when you think about how do you get that referral channel moving, and if you think about, partnering with maybe influencers in the space or other consultants that have a brand that are out there, the first thing that you can easily do to start building that affinity is some co-marketing where you promote their things. You put them on your podcast, or you put them on your blog post, you have them do guest blogs, or you put them on your website, or you get them to speak at events, right? You want them to start building this affinity, especially if you're a brand new early stage company that doesn't have your own brand. You kind of start latching onto them. And so it's more of a little give to get, but you can't think about, hey, come do our partner program. We'll give you 20% if you go tout our software out there. They're just not going to do it. We've got other important things. So I think, when you start these referral programs, start thinking about ways that you can start promoting some of these other people's brands in order to start building some affinity.
Well, I think that kind of plays into what in my mind is like the next notch up, which really doesn't have a typical name as we think about historic partnership programs. Because normally you have referral partners, you have resell partners, or white label potentially, and then you've got integration, product extension,
Totally.
Type of partnerships. But for me, there's a layer in between referral and resell, which is truly go-to-market partnerships, right? You are doing co-marketing, you're definitely referring low-hanging fruit. And Josh, I know you're working through this with one of our portcos right now, right? You're kind of experimenting as to what that strong joint value prop is. I think we talked about this bit on the last episode. But then more importantly, that is an extension of your sales team. And so you're not managing is the wrong word for it, but you are involving their team across the board from leadership all the way down to, SDR, BDR, if you've got, those types of motions, and you're integrating those into your go-to-market motion, and you're truly going to, go to market together. And think about how those co-selling efforts are going to lead to, again, that 1 + 1 = 10, or whatever the equation is these days. And that, that partnership model is where there's not a ton of resource out there for, even in terms of awareness. I'm why is that different? I thought that was a referral partnership. That is not a standard referral partnership. That is a very unique snowflake that I think gets lumped into referral, and also takes the normal motion that you would put behind a referral and amplifies that by 1 million. And that's where I see people falling down, because it's all right, I think we talked about this last time as well. You go through those initial gates that everyone knows, and then everything just drops off, and it's well, what are we getting from our partners? And, you get people barking at partnership leaders and stuff like that. Why aren't we getting more deals from our channel partners and so on? It's well, because you're not giving anything into that process. And I think to your earlier point, that's really where you have to give in order to get. And there's dynamics and nuances based on, are you the 10,000 pound gorilla, or are you that, scrappy startup? But it's going to be something that looks more like, your inside sales team than, this disjointed partner where, magically just kind of pop in the door and they're the best customers ever.
Yeah, I mean, the reason it's not a common label for a partnership is because it's fucking hard.
Totally. And it's a forever motion, right? Like you never stop giving that effort.
Yeah. I mean, all the stuff you're talking about. Yeah, sorry, Sean. It's just like, I'm thinking about even the stuff we did at Lead MD, like you're embedding yourself in this organization. Justin, you remember this, but I would suit up. I'd go to San Mateo once a month. I'd basically walk into the front desk lady, give her a hi and a wink and walk through the door like I own the place and just start wandering around. Right.
You take a little of that candy. They had the greatest candy.
Yeah, that's right. The candy stash. But, you're just kind of embedding yourself in this company, and that takes a certain level of trust from both sides to even do that. Right. And that's just like a small example. Sorry to cut you off there, Sean.
No, I was going to say it is hard. And I think the reason that there's got to be this unnamed kind of segue between referral and resale is because there's so much trust that has to be built within the entire organization on both sides, right? So you can't just say one day, hey, we've got this this resale partnership, sales get on board, marketing get on board, success get on board, support get on board, right? Where there's just this external, group of folks that are out there running a whole cycle, and then all of a sudden they dump you a sale on your and with no context or anything like that. And so you have to start building those relationships across the board with all the departments. And we talked about this last time too. Like, you've got to have that stakeholder buy-in, and then you've got to implant those people into those processes and understand, from a, SOW perspective, like who's going to do what, and who's responsible for what, and creating those different motions. Sorry, there's a turkey outside my window right now.
You got your
mine too. Holy shit!
Yeah, how are you, Justin?
It's a really large turkey.
If there's a turkey running around in Scottsdale, Arizona, we got problems. That might be like the fourth seal of the apocalypse or something. But it's funny we're talking about resale a little bit, like, which is in my mind, a very mature motion. Like, you have to really know, what you do, how you do it, and divvy up those responsibilities in a way that's intentional. But and lately we've run into a handful, maybe even more, of businesses that slingshotted right to resale. And now, of course, they're seeing the negative ramifications of that, which is either you don't know your customer, or potentially even worse, your customer doesn't know you.
That's it.
And you're also you've got challenges in terms of how it was sold, what the expectations are. You've got churn, coming in there is a strong impact. You've got pricing ramifications. So just mentally, I've always seen resale as a really dangerous water. And granted, there are some businesses that are designed and built and should be, white label or resale businesses. But I feel like that's the partner, running their motion, and the other party not having a really strong expectation setting component and cultural and strategic goal in mind, because it's easy to get sucked into someone's engine, especially when you're viewed as a widget or something that fills a gap in their solution. And now suddenly you're giving them a new SKU and you're giving them pricing. And in fact, Josh, now I'm thinking the second company we did, that's very expected within their their ecosystem, or their industry is resale. And so even when we were starting to talk partnerships, it was oh no, they've got a rate card and they're just taking it end to end. It was wow, you're a brand new startup business that no one knows what you do, and what they do is highly unique. And so I feel that's a really dangerous place to be in, especially when you're not there intentionally.
Well, think about the tiers we went through, the referral, the code GTM, and all the stuff that we talked about that was hard in those things organically. Well, when you look at a space like IT, which is largely sold through resellers, you've got these big players like CDW as an example, right? And all their reps are out there selling this bag of stuff that they have through these vendors. Well, you know how it is, right? Who's getting comped the most? So you talk about your referral, your rev share, whatever. Who's paying me the most? Who's in my ear the most? Who's sending me the most, referrals, whatever it may be. That's a really, really hard game to play that requires a ton of effort to make sure your resale channel, and the one you're talking about in our portfolio, that the primary product is sold through resellers. That's not the only thing they're selling, right? They're selling other things on top of it. So how do you get their attention? It's not the easiest thing in the world.
Yeah, I think just taking like a step back, I think it's really important for organizations to do a bit of an analysis of where they sit in their ecosystem, specifically where they sit. Are they a platform? Are they an add-on? Who is adjacent to them? What categories are adjacent to them? Who are the biggest players in those categories? How are they selling? How do things get sold, et cetera? And start to really understand what is, partner adjacent to them. Because quite honestly, this isn't a one size fits all. And it may be that you are not set up to have a resale model, or it may not be that you are not set up to have a good referral channel. And that has to do with the complexity of what you're selling, how easily it integrates into different things, how easily it's sold, how easily it can be explained, can it tap into a larger solution, as we talked about before. And so oftentimes, talking about, again, stakeholder buy-in, you might have the C-suites like, we want to do partnerships. They're like, hey, partner person, go figure this out, right? And they're like, we'd love to have a strategic reseller. Like it doesn't go from start a partner program to have a strategic reseller anytime soon, right? There's a lot of steps involved. And oftentimes they're the ones that just say, yeah, partnership sounds great, go figure it out. And they don't like the answer, which is that you're not going to see an automatic ROI anytime soon. You cannot put this in your forecast necessarily. These are things that you build over time.
Yeah. This is a biased comment for sure, but I think one of the underserved partnerships that people don't think about as much is niched consultants. And, I obviously have a bias from that because that's what I sold. But niched consultants are always trying to sell more services. They're trying to be stickier. They are experts, like deep experts in what they do. They often have really deep trusted relationships that last for a very long time. And there's just something, if you have a product that's niched and there's a consulting contingent out there that focuses on your niche of the world, that is a highly complementary partnership. You're not competing the same way you would be in a software to software partnership.
Well, the key to that, I feel like, is, a lot of consultancies don't have what I would call a traditional sales team or sales channel. And therefore you're dealing with like naturally consultative individuals who understand a value exchange, want to understand your product or offering, and are going to go through the work to really, develop an ROI model or a value prop that does not only make sense, but is well thought out. And, each of those pieces has kind of scientifically been formulated. When you dump that into, a normal B2B SaaS AE, right? Like they're just not inherently going to go through that motion. Some might, but on the whole, that's not a very common exercise. And so, I think that also just goes to, if who is the DNA of the partner, where are you going to be able to get some of those quicker wins, to your point? And if you're not dealing with a team that looks like that, now you've got to, product marketing becomes monstrous, like getting in with their sales engineers, getting in with their AEs, getting in with their BDRs, and just doing all of that education and support becomes so much more critical, because there's no way that you want someone giving the wrong, value. Oh, this is going to, cure cancer. You told them our product was going to do what? You know what I mean? And now you've got to deal with that, that NPS and that customer unhappiness. And so knowing where the partner is on that maturity line is I think just as important as understanding what types of partners you want to go out and partner with.
Yeah, so I recommend having some level of certification program. And it could be something super light, like you go through a couple of days of sales training. It could be answering some questions. It could be sitting through a product demo, right? And that can evolve over time. But you got to have a baseline, especially people are talking about you, right? It's like they have to be on brand. They've got to be talking about the same value props. They can't be just selling, what they think adds value. It has to be in line with your mission, because to the point earlier, especially on the resale side, you can start losing touch with your customer. Your customer may not even know who you are. And ultimately, you have no control over the trajectory of their customer lifecycle.
So let's talk about that for a second, because I've always been on the other end of, for the majority of my career, been on the other end of the partner certification aspect. And man, I've seen some really, really piss poor certification. And that goes to end user as well, because there's this, I'll say it's obvious, but like there's a strange dynamic in certainly B2B SaaS, to where you're trying to create a certification, but you don't want to create any friction or any gate to the usage of your product. And so we create these like false experts. And there are plenty of, certifications that we can point to out there in terms of like, oh, great, you're, fill in the blank certified. That basically means nothing in a real world. It's just, somewhat of a window dressing type certification. But like Sean, obviously, based on what you just said and having sat in that seat, like what were some of those goals for a certification program?
So it had to based on partner type. I'll start with, our solution partners, which were basically consultants, right? And we wanted them, they had to go through a program where they knew how to implement the product from a technical perspective, because they first started becoming partners to fill the gaps between our velocity of implementations. So we didn't have enough people in seat to do that. So we're like, you need to get products certified, right? And then from there, they had to get certified on the messaging. And that was stage one, right? That was the base level that we had. That evolved over time, but we needed them to be able to implement the product technically and speak the way that we speak about the product. On the integration and product side of things, if they were one of our ecosystem partners, they had to go and read through our APR documentation. They had to understand the use cases for integration. There was 4 or 5 main ways they could go integrate before they went into our program, because what ended up happening is that we'd give these developers a sandbox, and they'd come in there and they'd start building stuff. And then all of a sudden we'd have this, we had integrations at SalesLoft where they would just all of a sudden have so many questions on things that were written in the API docs that were already explained. We had guides created. We had all these different things. And our engineers like, we're not going to do this anymore if this is what's going to happen, right? So we had to start putting up gates to have access to those dev licenses and access to that email address until they actually just spent a little bit of time on it. But, for us, it wasn't about trying to keep them from things. It was trying to just make sure they had some base level of knowledge so they could go execute on some, menial tasks without needing our hand-holding. Because going back again, and I'll harp on this a million times, but you have to have stakeholder buy-in. And if they're taking resources from their teams, again, partnership sits in the middle of everything. So you're asking everyone else for help. If they take away too much of that bandwidth, then they'll just stop caring about it and stop supporting it.
Mm-hmm. How do you balance that though? The being supportive and enablement function versus being a gate and a blocker to getting things done?
Well, at SalesLoft, it was me making decisions. Like when someone got to be too much, I was like, all right, sorry guys, I'm kicking them out, right? And that had to happen. And so there wasn't that we scaled that over time. But ultimately the responsibility came down to the partner. And so we told them, and it was part of that framework of getting certified. It's like, if you don't know these things, and if you're coming in to ask these questions, you will not get support from our team. And so there's some people that got frustrated with that, but I was like, the alternative is that I can literally jam all this down your throat over and over and over again and make it really difficult for you to get in the door in the first place. So I don't know if there's like a silver bullet to this at all, but there's a balance between, do you want to be easy to be partners with, or do you want to be difficult? And I think that has a lot to do, it's kind of parallel with the size and maturity of your organization. The bigger you are, the more you can ask of people. The smaller you are, the more you're going to have to give.
I remember a couple of instances being real fucking difficult. Basically telling you that on the other end that I'm not getting certified. I know your shit better than your people do. Just let me go sell it.
Yeah. Which also can be, but you talk to the right person, they'll be like, fine, I do it. Because everyone's trying to look for value. But again, it depends on what level on the totem pole you're talking to and how strategic you are of the partner.
Yeah. There's certainly some interesting conversations with because my end goal is to get into the field, right? Like I felt to me, the partner person was a gate. So I was just trying to get through that check box and get into the field and try to make some magic happen there. But I get it from your standpoint. Like you got to have some level of control as the thing scales out. Like you can't,
especially
everyone can't be
building product, you know what I mean? Like from an integration standpoint, that's, essentially they are representing your product in terms of how like that integration works. I'm trying to think of who does that really well.
HubSpot.
I think HubSpot. I was going to say Slack. Slack
does like really well too.
Yeah. Whenever you're like presenting those, like, all right, this is, there's that phrasing software, the right way. Like these are the right way, for this type of integration, or how this should look within an application and so on. Like, people that have gone through that exercise and can provide that context, I feel like, are setting themselves up for a greater degree of success.
Yeah. I mean, and then the last thing I'll say about certifications, it doesn't have to be all bad, or it doesn't have to be all friction. It can be something where you add value as they get through that process. So things like discounted sponsorships or free sponsorships or free blog posts, or if you reach this tier, you get to go do these guest things. You can be, you can speak to our customers, or you get, access or introductions or however it is. So, again, it doesn't have to be all friction. You have to do this to get in there. It's be like, okay, once you get here, we'll put out a blog post with you guys and you can talk about the joint use case, right? Ahead of it actually coming out, right? You get some beta testers and things of that nature. So, it doesn't always have to be a miserable experience.
Man, that's an aspect that just people do not leverage enough. Like, you think about how valuable that customer base is, and the example here I always put out is like SKOs or RKOs or whatever acronym you want to use for them. Like, such a valuable forum to be a part of, right? And like, for the most part, like, people don't like mid-size organizations don't sponsor or open up sponsorships within that level, or content presentation or creation at that level. And I feel like there's just so many like pragmatic ways to provide value to partners out there that tend to get siloed into these teams, and then those teams become very myopic in how they view them. Like, if you're really trying to do something different, I would say like that's the area where there's a ton of potential for innovation. Is how can you provide access to your internal teams, your customer base, to your point, like first looks at product or product roadmap and so on, and make those additional value adds to jump through the hoops that you want partners to jump through, or that is in their best interest to jump through.
That's right. And it doesn't happen enough. But when it happens well, you really do create an ecosystem where people want to come in. And so I think, if you think about it through these stages, a lot of what you're going to be doing early on is selling. You're going to sell referral partners. You're going to sell go-to-market partners, resale partners, integration partners, right? And ideally, you want to get to a point where there's enough ecosystem value for them to want to come in and do those things versus you having to sell it to them. And things like access to customers, being able to come and getting in front of your SKO, or being able to go present at your conference. Those things are all going to be value adds that get them to come inbound versus you having to go sell it every time.
Yeah, I guess sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just say from a rep perspective, like, what did you really care about when it came to partners? Because everyone, when I said access to like internal teams, I feel like there's like these very cookie cutter frameworks that, again, people try to fit folks into. Oh, you can do a 10-minute lunch and learn presentation to our sellers, right? Like you've been on obviously both sides of that presentation, but from the seller side, like, what actually enables or has value to a seller?
So go ahead, Josh.
I was just going to say, from my perspective, when I was sitting there, I was looking to niche into a group of people that almost cared about what I cared about, right? So if you think back to the early days of Marketo, they had built this with Bill Binge and Rick Harrell. They had built this like really fine-tuned SMB volume and velocity business, right? Like, services was a bad word, right? They like, listen, you're slowing me down.
It's supposed to be easy.
Yeah, it's easy. Like, I don't want anything to do with services. And as a result of that, we created some white label service packages that they could add on and got a little bit of traction there, and that was fine. But I was going to get nowhere with those people, right? And then the enterprise motion, like real enterprise, was in its infancy. And that's where the internal professional services team at Marketo was spending all of their time, was trying to enable these, monster logos that they were closing. And those sellers, their mantra was, yeah, I get it. I need help with this stuff, but frankly, I need one throat to choke, and I can tell my guy down the hallway to do whatever the hell I want him to do, and I can't do that with you. So that was a friction point, right? Well, there was this little like newly created mid-market team that had 7 or 8 sellers. They were kind of out on an island by themselves, and they were selling good, like low 6-figure deals and maybe up a little bit from that. And they had some really thoughtful people in that group. And I made 2 or 3 really good friends in that group who like wanted to go sell bigger deals and did good logos. And they knew it wasn't a volume velocity sales cycle. They knew it wasn't true enterprise, but they still needed to have a value message, right? And we used each other to kind of craft what that value sales cycle was going to look like together. And we made hay there for, 2-3 years until, acquisitions and things got blown apart. But for me, it was really looking at who's a thoughtful seller, who's selling into an account level type that's high enough to warrant wanting a services partner in there, right, to value engineer a sale, and that's another point. That team wasn't getting access to the value engineering team. Only enterprise was. So I could act like their value engineering team. So I think that's kind of the narrative, is think about what you need to, where can you squeeze yourself in where you are high value. I wasn't high value across the board, right? I was high value in that one group, and that was fine. We made some money there.
Yeah, I think that's so critical. Like, not only what is the value to the end user, but what is the value to the seller sitting on the other side of the table.
Absolutely. Yeah, I saw something similar in sales ops. So on the SMB and lower mid-market side, we were winning deals competitively based off of our integrations, a number of integrations that we had, and being able to connect into all the different products they had in their sales stack. Because at the SMB lower mid-market level with a lot of these SaaS companies, they had just such a mix of products, and there's so many different sales products out there. So they all had their different requirements. And so our sellers in those segments loved meeting with our partners to understand what the integration did, what value it had, how easy it was to set up, how it integrated with our system, how they integrated with their system, so that they could be fluent whenever they're on these deals. Because at the time we had about 2x more integrations than our number one competitor, and so that was a huge competitive differentiator. However, on the enterprise side, they didn't give a shit. They just, frankly, these were big monsters they were selling to at the enterprise, who they were slower to adopt a lot of these newer different technologies. So it's like they just needed to make sure that integrated into the core things: Salesforce, Dynamics, Gmail, Outlook, etc. Now, what they cared about was being able to add a layer of services to be sold on those deals, because our enterprise buyers expected us to have a partner to come in and do these things. They expected them to have us to have these things. And we're just like, they look around like, who can I use for this, right? And like, that's where that program started getting momentum, because like we were walking into some of our partners like IBM, and to, Google for Work, and all these like larger organizations that expected you to come to the table with 2 or 3 different options for partners. And so they wanted to go meet with our solution partners and figure out, hey, who can go support this giant enterprise motion? And so for us, we would just segment it. Like, I didn't send all the same updates to enterprise that I did to mid-market or SMB, right? And they didn't care. And so I think, to your point, like, you got to figure out what the outcomes that are looking for, how that buyer is buying, and then how you can help insert yourself into that process.
Can you, I'm not as familiar with, I was always on the solution partner side, right? Like, we were a services business. So the next tier you kind of started touching on it is this integration and product partnership.
Yeah.
I mean, you kind of gave a little bit of background there, but what is it, right? Like, give us the nitty-gritty of what an integration partner really is.
So for us at SalesOff, we had, when we transitioned from Prospector, which was a list building lead kind of gen tool that lets you go build a target list of leads, then put it in your CRM, which we sunset that, moved on to what was called Cadence, now the SalesOff platform, which is all about the engagement with the customer, the sales cycle, cadences, and messaging, et cetera. Well, we looked at it and we said, okay, well, now we don't have any more data, but in order to get this machine off the ground, people need to put data in here. So we're like, all right, let's build some APIs. So we built some APIs to integrate into like Zoom and Discover.org at the time and the rest of them, right? And that was kind of our first foray into like what an ecosystem looked like. And we realized, I started doing some research on like, what is an ecosystem? What makes you the product versus an add-on, or a platform versus an add-on? And so what we did is we did a benchmark analysis of all our users and realized they were spending about 70% of their day in our platform versus any other platform, over Salesforce, over their email, over everything else. So we're like, okay, we are the system of record. Now, if we are the system of record, we're responsible for building an ecosystem so that all these other products can go feed into it, because if they're living in here, they need to be able to access all those things without opening different tabs. The data needs to come in here. We need to aggregate all those things for them to be able to understand what to do next. And so we started just building out public APIs, built a program around it. And what we did is basically we built the first handful of integrations into like the big player in each of these different adjacent categories. And then everyone else came in. So what took, in the first year, I think we had like 15 integrations. And by the end of year 2, we had like 75. And then it doubled to like 150 the year after that. And we only had to build like 5 or 6 of them. And so it became this thing where we're building this ecosystem. So to dig a little bit further and to talk a little bit more about outcomes, the outcome that our business thought these integrations would create is this giant referral network. That's not the truth in a product ecosystem world. It's just, frankly, it's not. You're trying to create bigger value for your mutual customers. And sure, it helps in a competitive situation, but it's really hard for like to add on into your platform to be like, hey, you should go buy their platform, and vice versa all the time, right? There was a lot of that happened, but it wasn't something that you could go forecast for. What really, the outcome that we saw and that I drove towards with that program specifically was a competitive differentiator, hands down. We wanted to, and the affinity, and from a marketing and like go-to-market perspective, it was huge for us. We had every single, our conference was called Rainmaker. Every single Rainmaker, we were overselling every sponsorship that we had. We had them on stage. We had speakers. We had them bringing their networks in, right? It just became this larger than life thing. And if you think about like the biggest example of it is like Salesforce, they talk about building a moat around your product, right? And so we also started looking at net retention numbers and realizing that if they had more than 3 integrations outside of like core integrations put in, there was like I think there was like a 3x LTV or LCV, and their churn was like half of what normal was. And so all of a sudden, we're one of the big initiatives from an implementation side and from a customer success side is get as many of these things hooked in as possible. And so we started sharing our customer lists with all of our partners for any net new customer and saying, oh, they're a Vidyard customer. We got Drift, they've got this. Let's get these plugged in during implementations.
That's cool.
Yeah, that's such a critical motion there. Like, earlier we talked about, or in the last episode, talked about culture. Like, that's a cultural motion, right? Look, when you win a new customer, hey, what other, which of our partners are those also co-customers of? And just, making sure that those connections get made.
And we were in such a hyper competitive sales landscape in sales engagement. Like everything was like kill or be killed. Like every day there was another fire. They won this deal. We won this deal from them. Like it was so hyper competitive. Like anything that we could find that could help move the needle, people were going to. You had stakeholders on it. As long as they said, "Hey, outreach doesn't do this," then I could get anybody on board.
Well, to that point, like, so I think this is an uncommon use case, but maybe you saw it. Marketo was also the system of record for marketers, right? And they had a pretty what do they call their ecosystem? Launch point, yeah. And there were maybe 1,700 or so vendors in there, but there was this one use case I remember that got really popular for non-standard integration partners, so non-Salesforce basically, and it was with NetSuite. And there was a company out there.
God, what a nightmare.
Oh, I know. It was a total nightmare. But they built this connector, right, that was supposed to connect NetSuite and Marketo. And it got to a point where they white labeled it so that the Marketo reps could actually sell it, like on their paper. Yeah. Did you ever run across anything like that?
We may or may not have built something into a competitor's API that when a new customer came on, let it pull all of their templates and their cadences and all of their data and pull it from their system into our system. May or may not have done this. And that competitor may or may have done this to us. But it did start through a third party. And it was before there was ones that were made in-house. We did use like people like Mercado and Zapier of the world that could easily put those things. But like, I think those are pretty critical, and you can get really crafty like into solving a lot of these solutions. And so, one of the big roadblocks we had with ripping and replacing a customer is like, what of all the stuff I built?
Right.
Like, how do I don't want to migrate all that over. And if we're like, hey, we could do it like that. They're like, okay, and so it became almost too easy for our biggest competitors and us to trade customers, that it was happening like on a bi-monthly basis. We were just like, they'd have it like 6 months later, they'd come back over to us. But there's to answer your question, like there's a lot of these different things that we took from partners. There was a couple of things we did on like some of these middleware products that they built us stuff. And then we got the code base for that. And we basically just replicated it internally. And took that code. And so they open sourced it. Right. And so there's a lot of ways you can create these solutions, but like, I mean, I loved this. I loved my time there doing this stuff because there was always problems to be solved, and there was always very creative ways, or more than likely, there's really creative ways in order to go solve those problems. And having a big partnership base allows you to kind of like feed off each other and figure out like, hey, can you help solve this thing, or do you know anyone that can help solve this thing, and like you get real creative.
Well, that's where, and I know the fundamental answer to this comes down to market opportunity, but like that's where I feel like certain types of integrations that are so core to functionality eventually have to be brought in-house, or at least understood at a deeply specific level. Because the example that Josh is talking about here, so like it's no big secret that like Marketo was built with Salesforce in mind. Like all of their functionality was Salesforce dependent. And so, because there were these, very large organizations that happened to use Dynamics or NetSuite, as their CRM of record, which were not, many, but they were there, and the opportunity, on an account by account basis was large. Anytime you ran into one of those, like the propensity for failure was massive, because Marketo did not, and now Adobe did not own really the integration into those platforms. And there's so much variance in an instance of Dynamics that, I think they still support between cloud, and then between the different versions of each, that, like in 11 years, I literally backed out, clawed back comp and refunded a customer money once. And it was due to the NetSuite connector. And so because not because we screwed anything up, but because the connector couldn't do what the customer needed to do. And it was sold in that process that it could, of course, do those functions. And then we were brought in to implement, and everyone throws up their hands and says, this is not what this was built to do.
Yeah, we did. We had a similar one into Dynamics and HubSpot until we built our own natively. And we had partners to do it, this middleware partners, and I had like 4 different ones. And I think we had success 1 out of like 25 times, like in longevity, because the CRM connection had to be so specific to each business, and there just wasn't enough customization involved into it. And so if anyone from our customer success team is listening to this, they probably feel a little bit of attention towards me for pushing those deals through. But we wanted to win, and they were like highly competitive deals. But yeah, I think overarching, if it's a core integration like that in such a big business system, like you got to build it yourself.
Yeah. Sean, there was something you said earlier that made me laugh a little bit. You were talking about selling into a big enterprise customer and needing to have like this expectation of services. And this is relevant for early stage companies, and starting to think about, when do you find those partnerships that are going to maybe wrap services around what it is you do? I explicitly remember Visible. This is pre-acquisition by Adobe or Marketo. They were still, early stage, and they were getting really good market traction. And they sold a deal, or they were in a deal cycle with Cisco, and they put their standard 6K services pack in front of them, and Cisco just started laughing. They're like, what is this? Like, oh, this is our implementation. There was like, you think you're going to implement Cisco for $6,000? Right. I said, come back to me when you've got.
Oh, we put the platinum package in there. What are you talking?
They're like, come back to me when you have a partner who can put some real meat around this. And I remember Aaron and them calling us like, hey, how do we do this? What do we do?
All right. Well,
great.
Yeah, I think this has been another great conversation. I can't wait to the next one. Anything you guys want to add before we wrap it up?
I think the big cliffhanger here is, what will the turkey be doing next time? Is the turkey still live? And can the turkey come on the podcast?
It does have 5 babies with it. And so, yeah, it's still right here in my yard. I'll report back the next time. I've seen it a couple of times, but it's the closest I've got.
Assume this is one of those ugly wild turkeys, right? Not like a big fat.
Yeah, it's like a kind of a skinny one. It's like kind of.
All right, so before we
sure there's meat on that bone, but I'm not gonna try.
I was at my brother's bachelor, one of my buddy's bachelor parties. He had it at his parents' house in Montana, one of the best bachelor parties I've ever been to. And we're all getting ready to go out. We grabbed some razors, pack some booze and some, stuff to go.
You grabbed some razors?
The off-road, like
I was like, what kind of fucking bachelor party is this?
The off-road 4x4 things.
Okay, the side by
side. There you go. Side by side, coolers of beer, maybe some firearms, maybe not. Go up, and we get back, and his uncle is feathering a wild turkey, and we're like, dude, what the hell happened? He goes, well, this wild turkey was sitting in the yard, and like, I wanted to get it. So I kept asking Lance's mom if I could shoot it. And she was like, no, you can't shoot it on the property. And he's like, I kept begging and begging. So finally I just popped it. And he makes fajitas out of this wild turkey that he shoots in my friend's mom's, meadow. And we start eating it. And I'm like, dude, this is really good. What did you season this with? And he's like, nothing. And she goes, that's why I let him shoot it. They eat the herbs out of my herb garden.
Wow.
Naturally herbed.
Well, gentlemen, yeah. Thanks again for everyone who's listening. More anecdotes of Montana and turkeys. Tune in next time. Justin and Josh, another great episode. I think just do the table stuff, like and subscribe and all those the good things to our podcast, please. But until next time.